Hello everyone and welcome to my Y&R Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The tension in Genoa City was already high, but everything took a darker turn when Noah's long-buried kidnapping secret began to surface. For weeks, whispers floated around town about odd behavior, hushed phone calls, and unexplained disappearances in Noah's schedule. Those closest to him, Sharon, Nick, and even Mariah, noticed his distraction, but none of them imagined the true reason behind it. The calm exterior Noah projected couldn't mask the storm brewing inside him, and eventually the truth was destined to explode. What nobody expected was that Claire would become the center of the scandal, her arrest shaking not only Noah's world, but the entire Newman family dynamic. The police intervention would expose the tangled lies and unearth secrets that threatened to destroy reputations forever. It began innocently enough, with Sally stumbling across a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She had been passing through society late one evening when she noticed Noah on the phone, pacing restlessly near the patio. His voice carried in the night air, tinged with frustration and desperation. "You can't keep this hidden forever," he muttered, unaware that his words had an unintended audience. Sally froze in her tracks, curiosity overtaking her instinct to leave. She tilted her head just enough to catch the tremor in his voice as he continued. "If anyone finds out what we did, it's over. Not just for me, but for you too." Sally's heart raced. She didn't know the full context, but she knew one thing. Noah was hiding something massive, and it had the potential to destroy him. Sally wrestled with her conscience for days. Should she tell Nick what she overheard? Or would that only create more chaos? Her instincts told her to tread carefully, yet her loyalty to the Newman family nagged at her. What if Noah was in real trouble? What if someone's life was at stake? Sally wasn't wrong. Behind Noah's carefully constructed mask was a secret that connected directly to Claire, the young woman whose presence in Genoa City had already stirred suspicion and unease. Claire's involvement was more complicated than anyone could imagine, and soon the pieces would begin to fall into place, leading to her shocking downfall. The breaking point came when Chance, working closely with the police on a different investigation, received an anonymous tip. The message was vague but damning. "Look into Claire. She knows where Noah's been. He's not who you think he is." At first, Chance dismissed it as one of many false leads, but something in the phrasing gnawed at him. He discreetly began to dig into Noah's recent activities and found discrepancies in his alibi for several days. The more he investigated, the stranger things became. Surveillance footage showed Noah's car near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, far from where he claimed to be at the time. Chance's instincts told him he was onto something much darker than a mere lie. Meanwhile, Noah was unraveling in silence. The guilt of what he had been hiding consumed him daily. Every time his family looked at him with trust and affection, he felt the weight of betrayal press harder on his chest. He had convinced himself that protecting Claire was the right thing to do, that she wasn't fully responsible for what had happened, and that revealing the truth would only ruin her chance at redemption. But Noah underestimated how powerful secrets can be in Genoa City, how quickly whispers become headlines, and how relentless the police can be once they smell blood. The inevitable crash came when Sharon, sensing her son's distress, confronted him late at night in crimson lights. Her voice was tender yet firm as she pressed, "Noah, I've raised you long enough to know when you're lying. Whatever you're hiding, it's tearing you apart. Tell me before it destroys you." Tears welled in Noah's eyes as he whispered, "Mom, I never wanted this to happen. I thought I was protecting her, but now everything's spinning out of control." Sharon's stomach dropped. She didn't know who her was, but the fear in her son's eyes told her the situation was serious. She reached for his hand, trying to steady him, but Noah pulled away, too consumed by his torment to accept comfort. The truth came out not through Noah's confession, but through the police storming into Newman Enterprises 2 days later with an arrest warrant for Claire. Gasps echoed through the lobby as uniformed officers handcuffed her, reading her rights as Victoria and Nick demanded answers. "There's been a mistake," Victoria insisted, panic rising in her voice. But the lead officer was firm. "Claire Grace, you're under arrest for your role in the abduction of Noah Newman. Anything you say can, and will be used against you in a court of law." The word sent shockwaves across the Newman family. Abduction? Abduction of Noah? Nothing made sense, until Noah himself stepped forward, pale as a ghost, unable to deny what was finally laid bare. The courtroom of public opinion erupted instantly. Whispers raced through Genoa City like wildfire. Claire, who had fought so hard to prove she was more than her past, now stood accused of one of the most heinous acts imaginable: kidnapping a Newman. The irony was bitter. For months she had tried to build trust, to show that she wasn't a threat. And now, shackled and humiliated, she looked every bit the villain her detractors always painted her to be. But what stunned everyone even more was Noah's silence. He neither defended her nor condemned her, leaving the town desperate to understand what really happened. Why would Noah protect someone who had allegedly abducted him? Why did he hide the truth until it reached this explosive breaking point? The air in the Newman ranch was thick with a fragile newfound peace, the kind that is so hard when it feels more like a temporary ceasefire than a true armistice. For weeks, the entire family, and indeed the whole of Genoa City, had been navigating the seismic aftershocks of the revelation that Claire Grace, the sweet-natured young woman who had so charmed Cole and Victoria, was in fact the daughter of Jordan, the vengeful specter who had haunted the Newmans for decades. The betrayal had been absolute, a poison-tipped arrow aimed directly at the heart of the family, and the path to any form of reconciliation had been paved with suspicion, therapy, and a desperate, weary hope that sometimes felt like a fool's errand. Yet, against all odds, a tenuous bond had begun to form. Victoria, with her fierce maternal instincts and a surprising capacity for forgiveness that she reserved only for the most extreme family circumstances, had taken the lead. She saw in Claire not just her aunt's manipulative pawn, but a lost, damaged soul who had been weaponized by a lifetime of lies and neglect. She saw the ghost of her own rebellious youth, the longing for identity, and she made the conscious, contentious decision to offer Claire a chance at redemption within the formidable walls of the Newman Empire. Nick, ever the protector, had reluctantly fallen in line, his loyalty to his sister outweighing his deep-seated mistrust. Victor, the great patriarch, watched it all with an inscrutable gaze, his thoughts a locked vault, his approval neither given nor explicitly withdrawn, a silent, looming judgment that everyone understood could be revoked at a moment's notice. It was in this precarious atmosphere that Noah Newman found himself grappling with a turmoil that was uniquely his own. He had been the primary target of Claire's initial scheme, the one lured under false pretenses, his kindness and open heart exploited with chilling precision. The memory of that betrayal was a cold stone in his gut, a constant reminder of his own naivete. And yet, as he watched his mother and uncle slowly, painstakingly, weave Claire into the family fabric, he felt a confusing cocktail of resentment and a strange, reluctant empathy. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes when she looked at him, the flinch of shame that she could never quite conceal. He heard the sincerity in her voice during family dinners, where the conversation was stilted but civil, and he began to understand the profound difference between being a willing villain and a broken instrument in someone else's wicked symphony. This understanding did not erase his pain, but it complicated his anger, muddling it with a sense of pity and a burgeoning, if hesitant, belief that people, no matter how lost, could indeed change. He started to engage with her in small ways. A passing comment about the weather, a question about a book she was reading. They were insignificant gestures on the surface, but in the high-stakes emotional landscape of the Newman family, they were monumental steps toward a fragile truce. This delicate dance of reconciliation was abruptly shattered on a Tuesday afternoon that began with no portent of the chaos to come. Noah had agreed to meet Claire at Society for a coffee, a suggestion from Victoria, who was fervently hoping these small, neutral ground interactions would accelerate the healing process. The conversation was awkward, punctuated by long silences and carefully chosen words, but it was civil. It was progress. As they were preparing to leave, Claire's phone, sitting on the table between them, lit up with a notification. It was a calendar reminder for a therapy session. But as Noah's eyes inadvertently scanned the screen, he saw another notification just below it, a preview of an email from an unknown sender. The subject line was stark and terrifyingly clear. Proof of the kidnapping, the full audio. Noah's blood ran cold. His entire body went rigid. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, faded into a dull, distant roar. Kidnapping. The word echoed in his mind, a trigger for every nightmare he'd endured. Claire, seeing the color drain from his face, followed his horrified gaze to her phone. Her own expression shifted from confusion to dawning, abject terror. She snatched the phone from the table, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. "No, I don't know what that is," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. But Noah was no longer listening. The fragile bridge of trust they had been building splintered and collapsed in an instant. "Audio?" he repeated, his voice low and dangerous, a tone she had never heard from him before. "What audio, Claire? What did you do? What did you record?" The questions were fired like bullets, each one hitting its mark. The other patrons in the restaurant were beginning to stare, sensing the seismic shift in the air at their table. Claire was shaking her head, tears already welling in her eyes, but they were no longer a currency he was willing to accept. They felt like a performance, a continuation of the grand deception he had already fallen for once. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is over," he hissed, the words meant for her alone. "The second chance, the forgiveness, all of it. You were playing us this whole time." Before she could form a coherent denial, he turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving her sitting alone, exposed and trembling, the phantom weight of that unknown audio file crushing her. She frantically opened the email, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was from an encrypted, anonymous account. The body of the email was blank, but there was an audio file attached. With a sense of impending doom, she plugged in her earphones and pressed play. The voices that filled her ears were her own and Jordan's, crackling with the slight distortion of a hidden recording. They were planning it. The initial contact, the feigned vulnerability, the location. It was all there in her own voice, cold, calculated, and damning. She didn't know the recording existed. Jordan, in her infinite cunning and paranoia, had documented her own evil, perhaps as insurance or simply as a perverse trophy. And now someone had unearthed it and sent it to her, a ticking time bomb delivered directly into her hands. Panic seized her, cold and absolute. She fumbled with her phone, deleting the email, erasing the file, but she knew it was a futile gesture. If she had received it, who else had? The answer came faster than she could have ever feared. By the time Claire stumbled out of society, her world already collapsing, Noah was already on the phone with Victoria, his voice cracking with a toxic blend of fury and betrayal. "She recorded it, Mom. She and Jordan, they had a conversation planning the whole thing, and she recorded it." This wasn't just her following orders. This was her being an active, enthusiastic participant. "We've been housing a snake." Victoria, from her pristine office at Newman Enterprises, tried to inject calm to reason to suggest there must be an explanation, but Noah was beyond reason. The raw wound of his kidnapping had been torn open anew, and this time, it felt infinitely more painful because he had allowed himself to hope. Meanwhile, across town, the same anonymous email landed in the inbox of Christine Williams, the district attorney. For her, it was not a personal betrayal but a professional gift, a piece of irrefutable evidence in a case that had been, until now, frustratingly complex from a legal standpoint, relying heavily on Claire's own testimony against Jordan. She listened to the audio once, then twice, a grim satisfaction settling on her face. This changed everything. The following 24 hours were a whirlwind of frantic activity and escalating dread within the Newman family. Victor, upon being informed, immediately retreated into his most formidable self, summoning his legal team to the ranch for a war council. His initial grudging acceptance of Claire evaporated, replaced by the cold, ruthless pragmatism that had built his empire. "This is a disaster," he boomed, his voice echoing in the great room. "Not only is she a liability, but this recording makes her a convicted felon waiting to happen. We will not be dragged through the mud because of this girl's treachery." Victoria fought back, her voice strained with a desperate, maternal ferocity. "We don't have the full story, Dad. We don't know the context. This could be edited, manipulated. Jordan could have forced her to say those things." But even as she said the words, they rang hollow in her own ears. She had heard the cold certainty in Noah's voice, and she knew the legal mind of Christine Williams would leave no stone unturned. Cole, torn between the daughter he was only just beginning to know and the son who was his flesh and blood, was a portrait of agonized conflict, his loyalty shredded by the devastating revelation. The family was once again at war, not with an external foe, but with itself, the fragile unity shattered beyond recognition. The storm broke on a rain-swept Thursday morning. Claire, having spent a sleepless night at the Grand Phoenix under a sort of unofficial house arrest dictated by Victor's security team, was staring blankly out the window at the slick, dark streets of Genoa City. She was trapped, isolated, with no allies left to call upon. The knock on the door was firm, authoritative, and utterly final. She knew with a chilling certainty who it was before she even turned from the window. Opening the door, she was met by the stern faces of two Genoa City police officers, with Detective Chloe Mitchell standing solemnly behind them. Chloe's expression was not unkind, but it was resolute, professional. "Claire Grace," one of the officers said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you are under arrest for the kidnapping of Noah Newman. You have the right to remain silent." The words continued, the familiar Miranda rights washing over her in a wave of surreal horror. This was really happening. The past she had tried so desperately to outrun and atone for, had not only caught up to her, it had ensnared her in its jaws. There was no struggle, no dramatic scene. As if in a trance, Claire numbly held out her wrists, the cold metallic click of the handcuffs closing around them, a sound she knew would haunt her forever. It was the sound of her second chance dying. The journey from the opulent lobby of the Grand Phoenix to the stark, fluorescent-lit booking area of the Genoa City Police Department was a blur of shame and flashing camera lights. Someone had tipped off the press. Of course they had. The fall of a Newman, even a tangential one, was always front-page news. The photographs of Claire, pale and handcuffed, her head bowed against the driving rain, would be splashed across every tabloid and news site by noon, the narrative of the Newman nanny's treachery now set in stone. The booking process was a dehumanizing ritual: fingerprints, mugshots, the confiscation of her personal belongings. Each step felt like another layer of her identity being stripped away, leaving behind only the accused, the inmate. She was processed, assigned a holding cell, and then left alone with the echoing clang of the steel door and the overwhelming weight of her circumstances. The cell was cold, the bench hard and unyielding. She drew her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, trying to make herself small, invisible. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her. The serious nature of the charges, the powerful evidence against her, the fact that the Newman family, her only potential shield, now saw her as the ultimate betrayer. The hope that Victoria had kindled in her heart guttered and died, replaced by a profound and absolute despair. She was alone. Truly, utterly alone. The news of Claire's arrest spread through Genoa City with the speed and force of a wildfire. At Crimson Lights, the chatter was a loud, judgmental hum, patrons sharing the latest shocking update with a morbid fascination. At the athletic club, it was the topic of choice over whiskey and business deals, a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting outsiders in. For the Newmans, it was a cataclysm. Victoria received the call from her lawyer and let out a choked sob, collapsing into her office chair. She had failed. She had tried to tame the storm, but the storm had won. The guilt was a physical pain. Guilt for not protecting Noah better, for not seeing this coming, for believing in Claire and in doing so, potentially putting her entire family in legal and reputational jeopardy. Cole was devastated. His dream of a reunited family evaporating into a nightmare of prison visits and court dates. He blamed himself for not being a stronger presence, for not seeing the darkness in Jordan sooner, for every misstep that had led to this moment. Nick's reaction was one of grim validation. He had warned them. He had said she couldn't be trusted, that the damage was too deep. He took no pleasure in being right, only a weary sadness that his family had to endure this fresh hell. Noah was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. There was a bitter, vengeful satisfaction in seeing Claire held accountable, a feeling that justice in its most primal form was being served. But beneath that, lurking in the shadows, was a sliver of something else. A memory of the vulnerable woman he had started to see glimpses of, a nagging doubt about the absoluteness of her guilt, and a profound sadness for the entire, ugly situation. The initial court appearance was a short, brutal affair. Claire, dressed in a standard-issue jumpsuit, looked small and terrified beside her court-appointed attorney. The charges were formally read. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The words were heavy, legalistic, and terrifying. The prosecution, represented by a fiercely competent ADA, argued that Claire was a flight risk and a clear danger to the community, pointing to the calculated nature of the crime as revealed by the audio recording. Her defense attorney, overwhelmed and underprepared, offered a weak argument for bail, citing Claire's recent stability and ties to the community, ties that everyone in the courtroom knew had just been violently severed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a weary expression, took less than 5 minutes to render her decision. Given the severity of the charges and the strength of the evidence, bail was denied. Claire would be remanded into custody until her trial. The gavel fell with a sound like a gunshot. Claire's shoulders slumped, the last vestige of hope leaving her body. As she was led away, her eyes scanned the courtroom, finding Victoria and Cole in the back row. The look they exchanged was a heartbreaking tapestry of pain, betrayal, and a love that was now hopelessly complicated. There were no words, only the chasm of the aisle between them, a chasm that now felt as wide and impassable as the universe itself. The days that followed Claire's incarceration blurred into a monotonous, grim routine. The Genoa City Jail was a world of concrete and steel, of echoing noises and constant surveillance. It was a world devoid of color, of softness, of hope. Claire kept to herself, a target for the curiosity and aggression of other inmates who knew her story from the news. She learned to be invisible, to eat quickly, to avoid eye contact, to sleep with one ear open. The reality of her life was a crushing weight. Any fantasy of a future, of a family, of redemption was extinguished, replaced by the stark prospect of years, perhaps decades behind bars. The only break in the bleakness were the occasional visits, which were their own unique form of torture. Cole came, his face etched with a pain that mirrored her own. He promised to find a better lawyer, to fight for her, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. Victoria came once, the visit strained and silent, the trust between them shattered. She spoke of legal strategies and procedural steps, but the maternal warmth was gone, replaced by a cool, distant pragmatism that hurt more than outright anger. The person who did not come was Noah. She didn't blame him. In his position, she wouldn't have come either. His absence was a constant, painful reminder of the original sin that had brought her here. As Claire adapted to the brutal rhythms of jail life, a parallel drama was unfolding on the outside. The Newman family, for all its internal fractures, was closing ranks. Victor's legal team was working tirelessly, not to free Claire, but to contain the fallout, to manage the media narrative, and to ensure that the Newman name emerged from the scandal as unscathed as possible. Their strategy was one of quiet, powerful influence, working the levers of the justice system from the shadows. Meanwhile, a different kind of effort was brewing, led by an unexpected advocate, Sharon Collins. Having seen the transformative power of second chances at Crimson Lights and in her own life, Sharon couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. She saw Claire not as a monster, but as a profoundly damaged young woman who had been used and discarded by the true villain Jordan. She began quietly digging, talking to people who had known Jordan, researching her patterns, trying to understand the context of that damning audio. She even managed to secure a visit with Claire, offering a listening ear free of the Newman family's judgment. It was during one of these visits, as Claire recounted the constant psychological manipulation she endured under Jordan's care, that a new detail emerged, a detail about Jordan's habit of recording everything, not for posterity but for control to hold over people's heads. "She was always testing me," Claire whispered, her voice raw. "She'd tell me to say things, do things to prove my loyalty. It was never real. Nothing with her was ever real." This conversation sparked a new line of thinking for Sharon. What if the audio was one of Jordan's tests? What if Claire's cold, calculated tone on the recording was a performance, a role she was forced to play to survive, to prove her worth to the only family she had ever known? It was a thin thread of hope, but it was something. Sharon took her theory to Nick, appealing to his inherent sense of fairness. Initially resistant, Nick eventually listened, the memory of his own complicated past making him slightly more receptive than the rest of his family. He agreed to use Newman resources discreetly, to look into the provenance of the audio file. Could it be part of a longer recording? Was it edited? Who sent it and why now? The investigation was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass in a game they were already losing badly. Back in her cell, Claire was facing her own internal trial. The isolation and the constant anxiety were taking their toll. She had nightmares of Jordan, not as a captor, but as a mocking specter, laughing at her from the freedom Claire would never know. She began to withdraw further, speaking to almost no one, spending hours just staring at the wall, replaying every decision, every moment that had led her to this cold, lonely end. The prospect of a trial, of having her life picked apart in public, of being forever defined by this one terrible act, felt like a fate worse than the imprisonment itself. She was losing the will to fight, to hope, to even care. The world had judged her, found her guilty, and thrown away the key. She was starting to believe they were right.